Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting source material today, actually sent in by one of you. It takes us right into the heart of the latest in the U.S.-China trade situation.
That's right. We're looking at a piece from The Economist. It gives a fantastic ground-level view of what's been unfolding, especially, over the last couple of months.
And our job today, just using this source, is to unpack what these recent meetings, particularly the London talks that just finished, what they really signal, who's holding the cards right now, and what might be next, according to this analysis.
And these London talks, they kicked off June 9th. At Lancaster House, interestingly, the source points out a bit of history there, built for the Duke of York. You know the song.
Marching them up and down the hill?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe a fitting metaphor for a trade war with all its ups and downs, its escalations and, well, climb downs. Seems appropriate.
Okay, let's get into it. What does the source say was the immediate U.S. goal in London? Because it wasn't apparently some huge strategic shift.
No, not at all. It sounds quite modest, really. They were basically just trying to get back a truce and understanding they thought they'd already sorted out a month before in Geneva.
And the specific ask in London?
It was about China easing up on export controls, specifically for rare earths and, crucially, the magnets made from them.
Right. The source even has a quote from Howard Lutnick, America's Commerce Secretary, from Juneteenth, right in the middle of it. He said discussions were going well. We're spending lots of time together. Sounds, diplomatic.
Very diplomatic. But, the source is quick to point out that even if they managed to patch up that truce, things have fundamentally shifted. They use that Chinese phrase.
Oh, the one about the spilled water.
Yeah. Not all the water spilled can be returned to the pot. You just can't rewind the tape. Things have changed.
And what seems really striking reading this source is how China's confidence appears to have grown through all this. Confidence in their economy and maybe their resolve.
Absolutely. The source really frames both London and the earlier Geneva meeting as, well, the world's preeminent superpower, basically coming to China with requests.
Asking for help, essentially.
First, it was tariff cuts in Geneva. Now, in London, it's about these rare earths causing supply chain issues.
The source calls it an asymmetry of neediness, right? The U.S. needing something specific from China in both cases.
Precisely. And there are hints of this even at the top level. Remember that call between Trump and Xi Jinping on June 5th, their first since Trump's inauguration?
Yeah, Trump called it very good.
He did. But the source observes that Mr. Xi, well, he seemed in no hurry to take the call. It's a subtle detail, but it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Wow. That's a world away from how the U.S. apparently thought this would play out initially. The source reminds us, after those big tariffs were announced back in April, Trump kind of expected countries would be.
Kissing his ass is the quote used, expecting them to scramble to make deals.
But China didn't play along. Their strategy was different.
Completely. Tit for tat on tariffs. And the source really emphasizes that China showed it was willing to accept some economic pain itself, specifically to push back against Trump's pressure.
So the source argues China matching the tariffs wasn't the main issue for the U.S. economy, but it did provoke Trump into this wild cycle of escalation.
Right, which threatened serious economic damage for both sides. And the key insight here, according to the source, is that the U.S. ultimately decided it couldn't stomach that self-inflicted pain.
Which, paradoxically, ended up sparing China from the worst of it, too.
Exactly. And this whole sequence led to some economic results that, frankly, defied a lot of predictions. Many economists expected China's exports would just crater. Currency would plunge.
But the numbers tell a different story, don't they? The source lays it out. Yes, sales to the U.S. did fall hard, down 28% in April and May combined compared to last year. That's significant.
It is. But, and this is the kicker, China's overall exports, they actually went up by 6%. They pivoted, boosted shipments massively elsewhere. Europe, Southeast Asia primarily, they rerouted their trade flows quite effectively.
And maybe the biggest surprise, the currency. The source says the renminbi is actually stronger now against the dollar than it was before April 2nd.
Yeah, stronger. So definitely not the collapse some predicted. And these past couple of months have really shown a spotlight on what the source calls one of China's most potent economic tools.
Which brings us right back to the rare earths.
Exactly, those export restrictions.
Yeah.
The source names specific ones like terbium, dysprosium.
And remind us why these are such a big deal.
Well, they're absolutely vital for the kind of high-performance magnets used in a lot of critical modern tech. Think electric vehicle motors, wind turbine generators.
Things that need to work reliably, especially under heat.
Precisely. And China put restrictions on exporting some of these back in April.
And the source is clear. This wasn't just a theoretical threat. The impact, this potential chokehold, it started causing real alarm pretty fast.
Oh, yeah. Concrete examples are given. Ford idling an SUV plant in Chicago, late May. You had industry groups like the Motor and Equipment Manufacturers Association sounding the alarm about disruptions.
There was even a giant letter about car part production getting messed up.
Right. So the source concludes this really demonstrates China has a potent chokehold over America. And it suggests that while maybe industry insiders knew this vulnerability existed,
It perhaps wasn't fully appreciated in, say, the Oval Office.
possibly not. The source frames these last 2 months almost like a weapons test, showing just how powerful China's instruments of economic coercion can be when deployed.
Okay, so after the Geneva talks, the U.S. might have hoped, aiming for that truce, that China would just quickly lift these restrictions. But that's not what happened.
Not at all, according to the source. Instead, China launched this really slow, kind of murky review process for the necessary export licenses.
Described as being handled by an understaffed ministry just swamped with applications.
Exactly, leading to delays. And these delays, well, they clearly angered American officials. You see it in the quotes provided. Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, saying something like, maybe it's a glitch, maybe it's intentional. That uncertainty itself is telling.
Well, Trump was less ambiguous on social media.
Much less. Totally violated its agreement, was the quote. Direct frustration.
And the problem for the U.S., the source points out, is there's no easy off-ramp here. You can't just conjure up a new rare earth supply chain overnight.
No. The source estimates it would take at least 3 years. And even then, it might not cover all the specific needs. It's a complex challenge.
So what's America's move then? The source suggests they're trying to establish their own leverage points, their own kind of chokehold?
That seems to be the strategy described. The source lists several actions the U.S. has taken just in the past month or so.
Like what?
Okay, warning firms making chip design software about selling to China, threatening or stating they would revoke visas for certain Chinese students, and blocking sales of key parts needed for China's own passenger jet project, the C999.
And the source kind of reads between the lines here, presuming the U.S. might ease up on these measures if China moves faster on the rare earth approvals.
That appears to be the implied trade-off. It's like a new phase of the conflict, moving beyond just tariffs into these targeted tech and export controls. Checkmating, but with different pieces on the board.
So boiling it all down, the main takeaway from this source seems to be this trade war hasn't gone the way the U.S. maybe expected. Neither side looks capable of scoring a decisive economic win.
The mutual dependence, which perhaps China always understood more clearly, is now just starkly obvious to both sides. It's unavoidable.
Which means the future probably isn't about one side winning or even, putting down the economic weapons entirely.
It seems much more likely, based on this analysis, that we'll see this ongoing pattern. Mobilizing economic pressure points, tariffs, restrictions, tech bans, then maybe demobilizing them, using them tactically to keep the other side in check.
A bit like that Duke of York you mentioned earlier. Marching the troops up the hill, then marching them down again, but maybe without a final battle.
It's a kind of managed conflict, a stalemate played out using economic levers.
So reflecting on this deep dive, what are the key things for you listening to take away?
Well, I think it really underscores how these trade tensions aren't just abstract political maneuvers. They hit real-world supply chains, they affect the tech rolling out, the whole green transition, and fundamentally the balance of power.
And the surprising resilience of China's economy in shifting its trade, plus the very real power that comes from controlling critical resources like rare earths. Those are crucial insights here.
It paints a picture of deep entanglement. Two economic giants testing each other, probing weaknesses, using economic tools as weapons, but ultimately still very much tied together.
And if this source is right, if outright victory is off the table for both, and this mutual dependence is just the reality they have to live with.
It leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? What does stability, or even just a functional, less volatile relationship, actually look like in the long run? If it's not about winning, what is it about?
Something important to think about. That's all we have time for on this deep dive.